Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me, Natasha Nandini, in conversation with people who know stuff. Today, I'm talking to Lucybloom Webb. She is a Dublin-based yoga teacher. She's been teaching for about 10 years, but like many of us who teach yoga, she has a number of other disciplines that she weaves into her teaching, such as rose medicine ceremonies, moon work, and tarot. Hello, Lucy, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, when we were conversing, you reminded me of a couple of things, actually. One, that many of us, like you, were saved by the yoga practice. You told me that. And in doing so, we sort of become the wounded healer in a sense, where through our own necessity, we find ways of pulling ourselves out of our suffering. And then we pass that on to
Yeah,
those who come in our sphere.
I feel like that's the path. I mean, you couldn't have said it better. That's how I feel like my life has turned out.
Yeah. And well, the second thing was that I remember, do you know Tim Cummins, like the yoga teacher Tim? So a few years ago, I remember he posted something where he said that when people ask him what he does, he doesn't say that he's a yoga teacher, but he says that he helps people. And that really resonated with me because we support people on their own journey in many different ways. And like yoga teacher doesn't really give the full picture. Like we coach, we listen, we suggest different therapies and avenues that we may have tried along the way. So, we need a new word, perhaps.
Think we do need a new word. And I'm the same. Like I'm like, oh, I don't really first of all, I hate that question anyway. What do you do? Because it's not straightforward in our line of work. It's not like, oh, I work at the bank or I'm a solicitor. It's like, how do you distill it? How do you, yeah, I think he's got the right idea there. I help people. That's really all I can say because the yoga is a huge part of it. But like a lot of people that come to me, they don't come for yoga anymore. Like it's kind of widened. And while I do have my dedicated yogis, and they're there every week, and it's great to see such dedication to the practice. I find nowadays a lot of people weave in and out of yoga. Like when I started practicing, it was like you're dedicated to this, you're doing it every day, and it's a sadhana. Whereas I don't see that so much anymore. I think in the post-COVID world, that whole scene has changed, and maybe a lot of yoga teachers did decide to add more strings to their bow just because of their own interests, their own personal interests. And obviously, when COVID hit, everything changed. So we're living in a different world now, and there isn't to say yoga teacher just doesn't sum it up, really, does it?
No, no. But having said that, why don't we start with what you offer as a yoga teacher? You've said that you teach Tantra Yoga. And so I was wondering if you could just like explain that for everyone a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, I think it gets a lot of misconception for
Mm.
obvious reasons. And for me, I really got into the idea of Tantra in terms of in my yoga practice. So I'm really talking about very traditional Tantra. I'm not speaking to Neo Tantra here. It's not something I have really any expertise in. I started really getting interested in Tantra pre-pandemic. I can't remember the year exactly, and I got in touch with the teacher who was working between India and kind of Greece, actually. She's based. And she was offering an advanced teacher training in tantric yoga. And I couldn't really find anyone else offering this. So I went to India and I did the training. And really what the tantra yoga does is it really is focused more so on the energetic body, on the subtle body. So we're not necessarily going through a whole load of postures one after another. We hold postures a lot longer than we would in, say, for example, an ashtanga or even just a regular vinyasa class. It's not a flowing practice. So in that way, it's quite it can be quite confronting. So we're holding particular asanas for like maybe 2 to 4 minutes, depending. And I'm not speaking to yin postures here. These are
Mm.
active yang postures. And what I tend to do is I work from the bottom up. So I find that a lot of people nowadays don't tend to have a lot of grounding. And I think potentially that could be like a combination of Age of Aquarius and heads in phones, heads in emails. It's very airy and there's not a lot of earth in it. So I find that actually the first three chakras are the most important to work with. So I really work with these in quite a strong way in the beginning of a class. The upper chakras are much more ethereal, so they don't relate so much to the body. And really what I'm trying to do is get people into their bodies. So what we do is we hold the postures for a couple of minutes, and then I sound a bell and they'll sit in stillness for about a minute after. And what we're trying to do is deepen the connection with the energetic body. So it's not like you're just moving from one posture to another. It's like there's that integration space as well of like, what am I feeling when I hold a warrior position, for example, for a couple of minutes and really have to use my legs? And amazing things come up for people. It's a challenging practice, but I really feel that they reap the rewards of kind of getting over the mental block that can be associated with doing something physically difficult. And this particular, the way I was trained, we were initiated into over 100 kriyas as well. And I really noticed my own propensity towards giving up when things got mentally challenging. And it was really good to have a teacher mirror back to me that actually you're able to do it, but you're mentally giving up before your body is. And then I kind of realized that was like everything, you know, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And it was
Yes.
a bit of a light bulb moment. So I think even just passing that on to people has just been so invaluable. And people seem to love it.
Well, I mean, if it's in you, then they'll pick it up from that.
Totally.
The reason why I was asking about tantra, because I mean, the word tantra, it's like it's loaded. I mean, Hinduism today is very tantric, you know, compared to how it was 1,000 years ago when it was more Vedic. That's why I was kind of asking, because I wanted to know what the difference was. Why, well, I mean, why do they call it Tantra Yoga? And I mean, you mentioned like the emphasis on the subtle body. So do you know what school of subtle body, or what does this school of tantric yoga call the subtle body, should we say?
So this particular school, it's an ashram actually. It's in the middle of India, kind of outside Nagpur. And there's a tantric master living there. Now, he doesn't have much English. So I don't know what his exact vocabulary for it was when my teacher is one of his disciples.
Mm.
So we learn through her. Now she is British originally, and when she speaks to it, we're getting the terminology that I was always used to. Some of the words are slightly different, but this particular ashram it's called Shiva, so I am Shiva, and it really is it's a Shivite lineage, you know. However, there's a really strong focus on the goddess. So we worked a lot during this training with the actual the yagna ceremonies, so the fire ceremonies, and most of the time we were working with the aspects of the goddess. And there's a huge area in the center of the ashram that has 64 kunds going around the outside. So for anyone that doesn't know, a kund is like a fire pit, essentially. And then in the middle of these 64 kunds, he has these giant kunds, which are all in different shapes and relate to different planets. And this whole area is dedicated Tripura Sundari, and is kind of the overarching goddess of this space. So he is a very interesting man. I think he had something in the region of 60 something gurus and has pretty much done everything. I think he even started off as a rickshaw driver. And he has just developed this incredible propensity to read energy and to communicate with these divine forces. So we kind of learned through him, through the translation of his wife, first of all, who also lives there, and through my teacher. So how we were taught was really about the classic 7 energy centers, but really 6, because we don't really speak to the 7th. And his downloads, I suppose, or what he has kind of picked up on energetically. We would always work with there's 4 pumps at the edges of Muladhara, at the root chakra. And these pumps are what actually help to get that energy moving up through each energetic center.
And are these pumps, are they done by yourself, or is it that you align the body in such a way that it automatically, spontaneously pumps itself?
Exactly. So this is the latter. And what we tend to do is there's a couple of postures that can help. So for example, like a runner's lunge, or what they call Banarasan, is if you're holding that for 2 minutes on each side, that helps to get the pumps activated and to start moving that energy. So yeah, I think, but what you said about the alignment is really important, that is kind of executed properly in order for the energy to move.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing, because if you've got the crown directly over the tailbone and you're holding, as you were saying, an active position, so you're not just collapsed, it's completely held, then the pumps are spontaneous.
Exactly.
And also the connection to the floor.
Yeah, of course. The connection to the floor, I think, is everything. And that's a huge thing that's never really talked about in modern yoga classes. I find, I'm like, but the foundation, like if we don't have that, what is everything else sitting upon? And that's why I always say for people in between holding those postures to come and sit with your spine upright. Don't collapse into child's pose, because we're trying to get the energy to move up. And I think the more people do that, the more they can sense it and feel it, and, just deepen that relationship with this other aspect of themselves.
The 64 kunds that you were talking about, I'm wondering if they're connected to the 64 yoginis, who are like the guardians of the gate.
I think so. That's my understanding of it. It must be. I want to go and see them in Odisha. Are they in Odisha in one of the temples?
Well, I don't know if you know this, but Varanasi holds every single temple within its in the sacred city, and there is a 64 Yogini temple, which I went to this year actually. The original one, I don't know if it is in Odisha.
Yeah, I think it might be. I'm not sure, but in any case, I have to get to one of them.
Yeah.
You
also mentioned that these offerings there always involve mantra chanting.
Always.
Who can talk a little bit about that?
So we would be given a mantra. So the whole process actually began on the first day with getting completely naked and covering yourself in sanskar, which is like a herbal paste concoction. So you put it all over your body, like soles of your feet, everywhere, inside your ears, everywhere.
Color?
And it was kind of a green, like a dark green paste. And then you sit and you're given this mantra, which was quite a long one. And I believe the longer, this is what I was told, you might know a bit more about this. I believe the longer the mantra, the more gross, and the shorter the mantra, the more subtle.
So when you get to the Bij mantras, they're the closest to the supreme consciousness, yes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? So we were given this kind of very long mantra, and I can't remember what it said now, but we were just given it on a page, and it definitely had to do with Kundalini. The Kundalini was mentioned several times throughout this mantra, and we sat for an hour and chanted that, and that was kind of the gateway kriya, I suppose, to set us up for this whole process. And then throughout the process, we would do these fire ceremonies. And again, we would be given a mantra. So the mantra was usually related to the chakra we were working on. So say we would there's only 4 petals on the root chakra, and we would do kriyas for each petal, and then a kriya for the central bija. And then after that, we would do the fire ceremony. Okay. So obviously each chakra has a significantly larger amount of petals than the last. So you're getting into more and more kriyas as you're doing this. And at the end of each one, you kind of lock the energy by doing this fire ceremony. And that during that whole process took about a month. And I believe we couldn't cut our nails, or I don't think we could wash our hair either. So it was just all of that energy that you were culminating through your sadhana had to be kept. And if you were menstruating, you were in another building and you weren't participating in the mantra or any of the kriyas, because of course it's a different movement of energy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it was an interesting experience.
For sure, for sure. And your work with moon ceremonies, is it sort of related, or is that something separate?
It wasn't intended to be related. I started working with the moon a lot longer than before I started became a yoga teacher. It was like the moon stuff was always there. I think when I was a teenager, I was into the occult. Like I was definitely drawn to everything and anything esoteric. I don't know. It was just like, yeah, you
Yeah,
relate.
yeah, yeah.
It's just always there. I was just like, there's something more, you know? And there's such a rich history in Ireland of like the fae, the fairies, the spirits, the goddess, the land. And I guess maybe I was tuning into something with that and was always fascinated by the moon. So I was kind of journaling with the moon, I'd say, like just a very kind of basic practice. And then I really just started to learn about the cyclical nature of the moon. And one thing I really noticed was I know a lot of people speak to initiation on a new moon. And actually, tomorrow is a new moon. And like I'm feeling that energy of the cycle beginning again. And then, of course, when the moon gets to its peak fullness, it's ripe. And in nature, when the fruit is ripe, the fruit drops. So it's kind of that releasing moment of the cycle. And then we get back to the beginning. And what I was noticing was when I kind of looked back over all of the work I had personally done with the moon, and really that would be new moon, full moon, just very basic, every 2 weeks, just checking in. I would notice that when the moon is new, for example, the new moon tomorrow in Libra, it will be in a full moon in Libra in 6 months' time. That is how the cycle of the moon works. And what I noticed was when I was working on something within myself, usually if I was trying to work on maybe a pattern or something that I was trying to kind of rectify or become better at, when I really set that intention on the new moon of that sign, I understood that 6 months later, when I looked back, it always had come to fruition.
And they say that they also say that it's a 6 month cycle. Like, isn't it like the eclipse or something? If there's an eclipse or
It's
that,
six
it's
apart.
a 6 month,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And so
exactly.
you were feeling that energetically.
I never knew this. I'd never read this. And this has actually happened with loads of things in my life in this domain. It's almost like maybe they were just in there from a past life or something. So I was kind of tapping into that. And then obviously I really educated myself on the different lunar practices around the world. Obviously, it's huge in India. It's a big part of how they celebrate certain festivals. And I just knew there was a lot more in it. And so I think just before the pandemic hit, it was probably around 2018 or something, I started holding in-person moon circles. And they were just selling out. Like women were just crying out for a space to kind of connect to the weird and wonderful and not be judged, I think, and just be allowed to kind of go a bit crazy. And so that was great. And they were going really well. Then the pandemic hit, and of course, everything shut down and we were all online. So I moved it online. And I actually thought, you know what, now's the time to make this into a proper 6 month process that people could commit to. So Sisters of the Moon was born, and it's in its 8th iteration now, I think. And yeah, we have a circle tomorrow night actually for the solar eclipse. And yeah, we just work with we work with different ways to work with the moon. So we really tap into the astrology of the moment. And I run two different cycles. So the first half of the year, we always meet on the full moon. And during these practices, we might work with mantra, we might work with kriya, we might work with even just a teaching about something that can be helpful in order to maybe kind of tap into whatever's cosmically happening at the time. You know, if it's a Pisces moon, for example, emotions are going to be heightened, so maybe we'll work with some kind of, you know, emotional literacy or something. So I'm just kind of bringing in, I work very intuitively. I don't plan it ahead at all, really. I let it come to me naturally, and usually it's exactly what the collective needed at the time. And then in the second half of the year, we meet on the dark moon. And in these practices, we kind of go on journeys with the, I suppose the I would say the dark goddesses, although I think sometimes that word has a negative connotation. I don't mean it like that. I think these are the women figures, the archetypes who can allow us to be full of rage and full of envy and full of all the things we were always told we could never be. So we sit and we learn about each of these goddesses, and then we move through kind of a journey with her. So it's like almost like a yoga nidra. You know, everyone will lie down and I will take them through a process of meeting with this archetype. And it's really incredible what comes out of that space as well, because it's kind of a reclamation zone for women. You know, maybe hearing the story of Lilith, for example, and understanding that it's okay to say no and, you know, be sovereign, um, and to do that in a way that you are absolutely fighting for yourself. You know, we don't hear these stories very often.
Well, I think also what you said about the dark goddesses getting, you know, let's say bad press. And I think that those dark goddesses, especially like even if we look at Goddess Kali, for example,
Oh, yeah.
she's fearful, but really, what is she doing? She's cutting the heads off the things that we need to get rid of, all the bad things. That's what she's doing. So she shouldn't be having bad press, like you're saying.
They're misinterpreted a lot of it.
Misinterpreted, that's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
In the last circle, we met with Medusa. And you
Mm.
know, people often think of her as the Gorgon-headed man killer. And it's like when you actually hear her story and what happened to her, you know, she was taken, she was mistreated by her sisters, and then she was taken by one of the gods who just wanted to have his way with her, and a curse was put on her. Like none of this was chosen by her. And
Mm.
she really is such an embodiment of like female rage and repression. And actually, when we hear her story, it's like, yeah, actually, I want to communicate with that entity. I want to invite her in. So I've had a really incredible journey with just like how these goddesses have found their way to me, even. And it's just been crazy. Like some of the stuff, I just couldn't write it. It's just been like mad synchronicities that, you know, you're tapping into something beyond what we kind of see in the humdrum.
Well, if they're coming to you, they're coming for a reason, and maybe you can hold it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so far so good, and it continues to surprise me. And I think the main thing is to just meet these forces with reverence,
Mm,
and
yeah.
and ask them to help us, show us the way. And I know for some women, particular these particular archetypes, some of them will speak to them more than others. So it's like maybe you join a circle one day and you're like, where has this goddess been all my life? And this is what I've been looking for, which is always how I felt about Kali when I started along this path. And not to put down any of the male deities, because you know I love and respect them all, but when this depiction of this wild woman came out who was like, you know, severing the ego and, you know, just being downright outrageous, yeah, this is, I can get on board with this, you know. And I really feel her with me very strongly, which, I was saying to someone the other day, I'm like, you'd really want to think very carefully before deciding to work with particular entities.
Well, as you said it, I mean, if you have humility, then I think you're safe.
Yeah, I do. I agree. And bring offerings and appreciate the lessons and the chaos that can come when you've kind of decided, okay, I'm going to walk the path with you. What's the story?
And so tell me a little bit about your rose medicine ceremonies, because this sounds very interesting. And I mean, for the ladies, I think especially
Yeah.
rose is quite an amazing. Yeah, please.
I mean, rose as a plant medicine is probably one of the eldest on the planet. There's more recent data coming through now to say like it's been found worldwide 30,000 years in use, in medicinal use. So like on a very physiological level, it is really good for heart health, circulation, menstrual issues, anything to do with the blood, actually. It's a really helpful medicine for, and was always used in decoctions back when, herbalism was the medicine of the day. And on an energetic level, it's a heart medicine. It really helps us to connect into the energetic heart center. So what I've been doing, I studied not, I think the year before last, I studied rose shamanism with a woman here called Kathy Coyle, and she works particularly with indigenous plants in Ireland. So just before we came on the call, I was speaking to you about vigiling with certain plants. So sitting out in nature for an extended period of time, just dieting a particular plant. And part of my rose training was to do an overnight vigil with the rose, which was a really incredible time during Venus retrograde. And it was again just the spirit of the plant coming through. The rose has always been said to have been associated with Venus, because if you look at the base of a rose, you'll see that 5-pronged star at the septum, and it's on every single rose. And this 5-pronged, it maps exactly the movement of Venus through the sky every 8 years. So we know that the rose on an energetic frequency level is probably one of the highest frequencies on planet Earth. And she has this beautiful sacred geometry in the actual bloom, and then these thorns. So it's this really interesting dichotomy of like the protectress, the barrier, and the beauty. And I think that's what she can really help with in what I've seen in my work with it. So I started then facilitating not only rose ceremonies where we connect with the rose medicine in ceremony and we drink the tea and we go on a journey. I've always also worked one-on-one with people, and I've found it to be very helpful for clearing anything stagnant in the system. I often see a lot of movement actually in ceremonies, like this kind of involuntary tension release happening. And I've had all kinds of stories told back to me of people's experience of meeting past relatives, in the spirit realm, of really realizing something that they were unaware of before, of coming to terms with their emotions in a big way. So it's a really broad spectrum of what comes up for people, but I think it's absolutely incredible. And when people leave the ceremonies, they're like, where can I get the tea? I have to start drinking this all the time now. And that's beautiful to see, because it's like now you can take this home and you can just create your own practice with it, that you're now drinking this in a way that you're inviting the energy of the plant into your body, and you're inviting that frequency into your body. So it's a really beautiful thing. And I think the rose is always like the moon. I mean, I've so many women come to me and they're like, my grandmother. And it seems there's this big kind of connection with the rose and the grandmother, and even just the feminine lineage. I think it is a really potent feminine medicine. And in a world where we're doing, we need more of that. We need more medicines that can connect us into the stillness and the surrender of the feminine.
So how many different types of rose would you say that there are or that you work with?
There's so many. So, for example, and now I'm talking also about the rose family. So,
Mm.
not just like what we would consider, a rose flower, but like here in Ireland, it's really prevalent. The bramble, I recently dieted with as well. I did a vigil with the bramble. We also have the hawthorn here, which is prevalent everywhere. The common fairy trees in Ireland are usually hawthorns. These are all rose family: raspberry, strawberries, rose family, quince, pear, apple, all rose
Really?
family.
I
Yeah,
didn't know that. That's
yeah.
amazing.
So there's so many different ways. And really it's kind of like what you were saying about the goddess. It's the intention behind what you're working with. Everything in the plant world has a spirit. So what are you connecting with there? So I personally use in my rose tea ceremonies, there's a damask rose that I get from Pakistan, and it's dried and it's really beautiful. And then recently I just got another one from Egypt. And again, you just buy it as a dried form and I make a tea out of it. And that's what we drink. And it's subtle, but it's kind of floral. It's beautiful.
So do you try out the teas before you actually have them in a ceremony? Like, can you notice the difference? Like the damask, like what are the differences? So subtle, I'm sure.
The damask, you know it from India. Like, you know that smell of the rose in India. It's very pungent, actually. To me, that's the quintessential rose smell. And sometimes, like, I know rose season's kind of just over here, but like those really deep pink roses always seem to have that damask scent. And when I order them in their dried format, they're quite a deep, kind of a deep pink, like almost verging on red, but not quite. And then the Egyptian is way more subtle. So it's a very, very pale pink in color. And the scent of it is slightly fruitier. It's not that real floral damask.
Mm.
Um, but they both taste beautiful. And I think, like anything, they both bring their own qualities as well.
Yeah, so energetically, what are the differences between the two?
I found in the last two ceremonies I did, I used this Egyptian plant, and there was the most movement I've ever seen in the room. So, what I was saying about that kind of spontaneous shaking, there was a lot of that going on, a lot of release actually going on. Whereas with the damask, what I was noticing is that people were shifting dimensions a bit more with that one. Now, I don't know whether it was the groups in the room at the time, but I really felt like with the damask rose, it was almost like that was really good for journeying out of the body. And the Egyptian rose was really good for releasing stuff from the body. So I need to kind of keep a note of, what's coming up where.
Yeah,
But watch this space, because
for
I'll keep I'll keep an eye on what
sure.
happens.
Yeah, you got to share us your results for sure.
Absolutely.
So I'd also like to now, only briefly, perhaps we've only got time for a brief um, idea of what you do with the tarot cards. So
Yeah.
how do you even incorporate the tarot into all these things that you do?
Everything else. Well, it's really interesting. The tarot was gifted to me about 16 years ago, and it's taken about that long to really come to terms with the enormity of the tarot as a tool. Now, I was doing a ceremony last week, and I offered readings to a couple of the girls who were on the retreat the next day. And
Mhm.
they actually said that the tarot reading really helped them to ground into their experience and what happened to them during the ceremony. So that was one way avenue that I'd never thought to incorporate it, but that's brand new. This just happened. But I think in general, what the tarot does for me anyway, it's a form of divination. So you're pulling out information that's already within you and
Mm.
sometimes subconscious. So you're really maybe not aware of it. And that's why a lot of the time, people pull a card and they don't like it. They're like, I don't like that one. I want a different one. It's like, yeah, but you don't always get what you want. So it's you have to be brutally honest with yourself to work with the tarot and go, right, I might pull something here that isn't what I want to, it's not the answer I want. But I think, like with any magical tool, the more you use it, the more powerful it becomes. And to me now, the cards are never wrong. Like they just always give information exactly to the nose of what needs to be given. And I think that can be a really helpful way for people to maybe understand the situation they find themselves in with a bit more depth.
And so is it you that intuits the meaning of the card for the person? Because I mean, it can mean so many different things depending what spread you use, where it comes in the spread. I suppose even what the question was, if there was a question, and also what the state of mind is of the person. Is it clear enough to pull a card?
Totally. Yeah. No, and this is why I always say, okay, so when I read tarot, first of all, I get them to think of their question, but I don't want them to tell it to me, because that can give some kind of bias. And I really just want to trust, first of all, my knowledge of the cards. I have learned them upside down, right side up. I really understand the generic meanings, but so much of it is intuition. And I will always say to people, if a particular card catches their eye, I'm like, what do you see in that? Because they're actually going to get more information from their own interpretation of the card than what some book is going to tell you. Because the knowledge of symbolism is there. Like, we actually have it. We have it. We just don't realize we do. So I tend to get them to really focus on the question. So the frame of mind thing you mentioned can really help with this. So I'm like, whatever you're here for, whatever you want clarity on, keep it in your mind as I pull the cards. And then we will reveal all the cards and the story will begin to come out. And this is why I don't ask them what their question is, because, like, pretty much every time people are like, this is exactly what's going on in my life. And that just reconfirms for me the trust in the method, the trust in the tool, and just the power of the subconscious and the ability for us to know exactly what we need to hear. So there's a few different ways that you can interpret it. Card placement versus card meaning, also intuition. I do read intuitively, to answer your question. Like, obviously I know what the card means, but if particular cards come up together, I can interpret that in terms of, like, I feel like, there's more people involved here or something, so every reading is different, always different.
And can you just explain a little bit about the difference between the major and the minor arcana?
Sure. So the major are 22 archetypal cards. And these are the really big cards in the tarot. So you really want to pay attention to these if they come up in a spread, because they're really going to point to big life shifts, big realizations, whatever it might be. And they go from the number 0 to the number 21. And that progression kind of maps the fool's journey or the heroine's journey or the hero's journey. And a really good a good comparison is the Wizard of Oz. Dorothy at the beginning, going out on the yellow brick road with her little dog, is the Fool card, and then we see the progression, which is the arc of any story, really. It's all the same. You can map it onto any story. And so those are our big kind of life moment cards. And then the minors are the suits. So the suits representing the elements, the swords being the air element, which is our mental capacity, the cups being the water element, our emotional capacity, the wands, the fire element, which is our passion, our spirituality, our motivation. And then you have the pentacles, the earth element, which usually is either health or wealth, because it's what's in this material plane. So at the very kind of grossest level of matter. And these are really dealing with more day to day. Okay, so when these cards come up, it might not be a big, huge deal, but it might be something that's going on right now or is kind of in the background. And all of those cards are 1 to 10. And then we have the court cards, which are the pages, the knights, the kings, and the queens. And these cards usually relate to people. or they can just relate also to the stage of a journey or a process. So there's an awful lot to learn. There's 78 cards in a deck. And, you know, if anyone is interested in learning tarot, because I know it's becoming a lot more popular now, like I would really suggest to just get a deck and just pull a card a day. Don't look at a book, just look at the card and see what you see in it, and then map that onto your day. So if you, for example, woke up in the morning and pulled the Empress card, and you see this beautiful woman sitting on a chair in this beautiful, lush, abundant nature, and she's kind of reclining, and all of the lines in that image are very wavy. It's like, what are you getting from that image? And then go out and see what happens in your day, and start to create a kind of a textbook for yourself personally. I think that's the best way you can really just engage with them.
That's a really, really nice way of doing it. You mentioned that somebody gave you a pack 16 years ago. Now, I heard, and maybe you can tell me if this is true, that you are not allowed to buy a pack for yourself. You're only allowed to steal or be given.
I haven't heard this deal, but
Oh,
yes, I think you're meant to be given them. Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe you can steal them.
I think I don't know if I subconsciously put that into my own mind. In the 80s, I mean, like my moral compass was a little bit looser than it is now.
Okay.
Somebody somebody lent me a pack of tarot cards, and I still have them to this day.
There you go.
So so I'm sure that there was, anyway, I knew that you're not allowed to buy them, but I look at them maybe once a year. So this thing of once a day pulling one card is
Really
a
just when you're learning, I think. Like for me and my own personal practice with it for myself, I don't pull that often. I really just do one reading a year on my birthday, usually. If there's something coming up that I'm like, I really don't know what to do here, I'll ask for guidance. But I read for other people, and for myself, it's a powerful tool. Like we don't need it every day. The one card a day thing is a very handy thing. If you really do want to get serious about it, you kind of do have to forge a relationship with the cards, and you need to do that one card at a time. Yeah.
And
So
do you have a favorite pack?
I work with the Rider Waite Smith deck, which is it was kind of designed at the turn of the century by, so there was the occultist was Rider Waite, and then Pamela Coleman Smith was a really interesting woman, better known by the name Pixie, and she was kind of this really interesting artist, bohemian woman at the turn of the century, and she designed all of the images on these cards, which are the ones that probably you're most used to seeing. And she was never paid for her work, and she never got any kind of credit. So I like to make a point of kind of using her cards and connecting to her as well, because she was an amazing woman. And I think around that time, because it was such a male dominated area, we need to give credit where credit's due to the women who played their role. So for that reason, I really love those cards. But I have been gifted other decks that are like more modern, for example, which are kind of fun and interesting. And then I know the Crowley deck, the Thoth deck, is another iteration of the tarot that I'm not so familiar with, but I do have a Thoth deck here. I don't know, I'm not drawn to it in the same way.
Mm. Well, Lucy, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. It was so interesting, and thank you for sharing all that wonderful wisdom that you have. Um, if any of you would like to get in touch with Lucy, I'm going to put her details in the section below. And if you are in the Northern Hemisphere, or at least in Northern Europe like us, you're probably feeling the autumn is here, and the time has definitely come for warm soups and body oiling, which is fantastic for the joints, as it really helps remove stiffness, or at least that's what I find. In a week or so, I'll be talking to my friend Easter Bonifield, who will explain to us the ins and outs of Vedic astrology, but she's also an Ayurvedic practitioner, so she'll certainly touch on subjects such as oiling, which can help balance the system in this Vata windy, dry season. I hope you'll join me for that. Meanwhile, take care and see you soon.